everybody. Hope you're all having a nice Friday. We're a couple of minutes early, so I'll just give people another couple of minutes for when I said that we were due to start, and then we should crack on because this is my last bit of dyeing that I need to do before the weekend. I'm just going to shut the window because it's the bank holiday weekend, so there are already lots of cars coming past, people going on holidays. It's quite noisy out there, so if I close the window, we won't have too much traffic noise in the background. We're dyeing this month's Seasonal Changes pack. It's my first day back in the dye studio after Wonderwool Wales. So I've started to try and fill in some of the gaps. But yeah, so I've already got quite a bit of dyeing done today, and then got hopefully tomorrow some time in the garden, and then hopefully on what day? So yeah, Sunday. I'm taking Nelly, our collie dog. We're off to go and do another scent work competition day. So that should be a good way to spend the weekend. So I'm looking forward to all of that. So we shall get started. We are dyeing the Magnolias colourway. That's the one that most of you went for this time round. So we're going to be dyeing its kind of purples and greens and sort of it's got some really nice contrasts in it. So that's going to work really nicely for colour work and stripes and things like that. Purples, greens is always popular with people. So I've just needed to redo some of the stock solutions. We might end up needing to remix one of the colours because there's not much left of that one. But yeah, and discovered that I thought, oh, I could have sworn there was another pot of that dye powder. So I've just mixed up the last of what was in the container of the black. Hope there will be enough of that, but that's one of the jobs that I will need to do at the beginning of next week, is get on the phone to the dye suppliers and go, I need some more black dye, please, and work out what else we need. So let's get going. Okay, so as ever, my quick and easiest way to test out colours that we're working on them is just to pop them onto a little bit of kitchen roll, just so that we can see what they're going to look like. Phone, that would be helpful because that's got the colour palette on it. Okay. So let's pull it up so we can see what we're looking at. So as ever, phone on camera screen is never great, but that's the colour one palette that we're going for. So we've got a very pale silver, a dusky mauve, which is going to be that's going to be a challenge colour to get so it's pale enough, I think, in particular. We've kind of got an olivey limey green, a deeper purpley colour that I think I already know how I'm going to make that one, and then a much darker sort of foresty greeny type colour. So we're going to start off with the dark colours first, as I usually do, and I'm going to start off actually with the darkish purpley, how did I describe it when I wrote the things? I said plum, which is probably a pretty fair reflection of what we're going to be looking for. So rinse those out to get rid of any contamination. So I'm actually going to make that plum colour by combining a pink and the black together. I think that I know gives me a really, really rich, vibrant sort of purple colour. So let's go for one. That's filled all the way up. Right. Okay. We will go for that much purple because that's how much pink that I have got in there. Let me write that down. So we've got some of this in. It's the pink dye that is an incredibly vibrant hot pink kind of colour. But if you mix it with black, it makes a really, really beautiful purple. Because the black tone that I use is really quite, it's got a lot of purple undertones in it anyway. So we end up with that kind of colour. And it's a really lovely shade, and actually it's a really good match for exactly the colours that's in the picture. So when we picked that one and I looked at it, I said, I know exactly what colour, how to mix that colour dye. Sometimes I look at them and I have to think a little bit about what colours I want to combine, but that's a shade that I really like. And I really like making the purple in that way. It works really well for getting a really vibrant colour. So I'm just watching the chickens through the studio window, who have just discovered the planter that I put some new things in last night and are currently busily digging them all up, such is the way of chickens. Right, we'll leave them to have their fun. Let's dye the dark coloured green next. So the green that's on here is, it's sort of an olivey colour, but there's a little bit darker than that, and there's a little bit more blue in that. But I am going to start off with an olive green dye that I use a lot. So let's go for 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to put a different green in it, which is actually, it's a very jade green. It's got a lot of blue tones in it. By itself, I'll show you what it looks like. I don't think it's going to be quite... Ooh, that could be right for us, actually. I was thinking I might need to put some black into it, but I have a feeling that's going to be about right, actually. Let's have a little look at the picture. I am tempted to put some black in it. Let me write down what I've done so far. 75 olive, 25 black. So if you've got any questions, you can put them in the chat bit, and I will sometimes answer them in a sort of roundabout way. And some of the things I'll say, if you want to know more about dyeing, because I do have a entire online course that I wrote entirely devoted to dyeing fibre. So some things is kind of like going, I charge people for that, so I'm still always a little bit cagey about giving away certain bits free, because it's the dyeing the seasonal changes packs as the live stream is kind of a insight into how I work, rather than necessarily me giving you a lot of a tutorial. But Lisa says about what brands of dyes that I use, and the answer to that is that I use a mixture. They've come from, what I will say is that I don't use Jacquard and I don't use Dharma, simply because over here in the UK they're quite expensive to buy and quite expensive to obtain. And I get just as good a results from different brands. It's not that they're inferior anyway, it's just that economies of scale mean that actually there's better options out there for the quantities that I use. But generally, if they're being sold as acid dyes, they will do the job. Don't buy the all-in-one acid dyes, but apart from that, it's a question of finding the ones that are easily obtainable for you, depending on where you are, at a price that you like, of a quality that you like, in a particular colour palette that you like. So most dyers kind of have their favourites that they've migrated towards, simply because they give them the results that they enjoy using. The silver jugs are, I think they were eBay purchases. They're sold for coffee making. So I have them in a few different sizes. So I've got these big ones which hold a litre, which I tend to use for water more than anything else. And then these little ones, which are, I think these are 500 millilitres. Yeah, I think they're half that. I think they're 500 millilitres. And they work really, really well, because they're just going to last me for ages and ages and ages. But they were an eBay purchase, they're sold for as barista jugs for using with the fancy coffee machines and things. Right, now we've had a chat about that, I have had a chance to have a look at that green, now it's dried slightly, and I am going to put some black into it. It's a little bit too pale to give us the contrast that we want, but I don't want the full amount that my optic dispensers will give me, so we'll pull off some out of there. I will swap over to a slightly more precise way of measuring it out. I think we want 10. Let's go for that much. And you'll be able to see it's darkened the colour. And that's going to give us a better contrast because this green is going to be the real dark tone in there. So let's jot that down. But yeah, I was very grateful this month when we didn't pick one with all the pinks, because dyeing the pink in the colourway last month was an absolute nightmare to get it repeatable. My magenta coloured dye is the one dye I'm not very happy with, but I've never found a brand that does a replacement that I'm happier with instead. So I sort of stick with it, but it doesn't stay dissolved in solution very well. And it means that sometimes if you come back to dye the next day, you discover that from your stock solution, it's not exactly the same colour as it was before, and it's just a pain. Anyway, this time we are not using that magenta dye, so I am very happy about that. Okay, let's do the limey colour that we've got next. So that's going to be that one. So we started off dark, and I tend to work, if you've watched any of these live streams before, you'll know that I tend to start dark and get lighter as I go along. And I find dyeing dark colours much easier. They tend to be the colours that I can dye very happily, whereas dyeing pale colours at Wonderwall Wales, somebody said to me, she said, oh, lots and lots of lovely dark colours. I said, yes, I can't dye pastel to save my life, which is sort of true, because dyeing pastels I find really hard. But we're going to go back to using the olive green dye that I've got. But just by itself, this is going to be a little bit too murky. So the green colour swatch on this Magnolia's palette, it's got a bit more zing to it. So I've used some olive, and then I'm just going to brighten it up with a little bit of a shade of lemon yellow. And that should hopefully give me something. So we've got this shade here, and it's got a little bit, some more yellow tones to it. Now this is darker that's going to look on here, because that's only got 50 millilitres of dye in here. So actually it's going to need a little bit of water in there to make sure that it spreads evenly throughout the dye. So it's of course what determines how dark a colour is. Let me write that down. Is the total amount of stock solution that's there. So sort of we've got 100 millilitres of stock solution versus only 50. So it's naturally going to be a paler colour. Okay. Phone's locked itself again. Right, so we've got our magenta, which is kind of dark but not too dark. We've got our very dark green that we've dyed, and we've now got a paler green with some yellow tones in it, because one of the nice things about that picture actually is those real sort of zingy limes that are in there. And they contrast beautifully with these dark pinky purples and the paler pinky purples. We've got our two pale colours left, which, as I say, they're always the challenge when I'm dyeing these, and they're always a challenge for getting good repeatability. I'm going to start off with the very silvery grey, and it's dyeing this one's quite hard because I have a few options for dyeing greys like that. Is that I do have a dye which is technically grey, but it's a very blue toned grey, and the grey in this swatch is not blue toned. I then have a black that I use an awful lot of, which you've already seen me put into things, but it's a very purple toned black, and that's fine, except that this is not a purple toned grey. It's actually it's almost got a hint of brown about it, and this all starts to make it quite hard when we're dealing with such pale pastel colours. We are up for the challenge. We shall give it a go. So what I think I'm going to do, because I want a neutral toned grey, is I'm going to use a combination of black, and then I'm going to go to the opposite side of the colour wheel, because my black is purple toned. And if I put some yellow into that purple toned black, the shade should neutralise out, and I should get closer to a black that is a true neutral. That's the theory. So I want a little bit of black. Stop that. And let's make sure all of these are really clean. And then a little bit of yellow. Let's grab ourselves one last jug. We need another syringe and one that is definitely going to do accurate measuring for this, because I think I only want 1 milliliter of each colour. So 1 milliliter, so it's going to be like 2 milliliters of dye stock on 100 grams of fibre in order to get us the level of paleness we want. And of course, because I carry on dyeing these throughout the rest of the month, I do need to be quite careful that I'm recording the right amount. Let's just give that a rinse so I don't contaminate that yellow in that jug too much. That'll do. Okay, and it's really hard with the black actually to see because it obscures the lines on the syringe. So hopefully by putting some yellow into that black, I'm going to neutralise its purple undertones. Both of those have got water in, so we'll have both of you. Let's see where we're at. Bingo. Now I suspect that just looks like water on your screen. The camera on my laptop is no longer particularly fabulous. It's a really, really old laptop. But when I look at it in reality, there is a tiny, tiny hint of colour there, combined with the fact that the fibre we use has got slightly creamy undertones. I think there's going to be just enough colour to give us what we're after. My only dilemma is whether it maybe has 1 more milliliter of black into it. But I actually quite like the idea of it being even paler than it is in the inspiration swatch, because the magnolia petals really are very pale. So it's almost a neutral, but it's just had a tiny, tiny, tiny hint of dye in it to just mute the colour down ever so slightly. So the final colour that we've got to come up with and create is the palest pink. I'm also looking at that magenta as it's dried, and that's going to need some more black into it, because at the moment it's a little bit too pale for what we're after. But I don't think it wants another full 25 milliliters into it. I'm just going to go for another 10 just to mute down the colour ever so slightly. That's my black. Okay. So let's have a quick check. But I think that's going to be a better darker colour. So I've just toned the pink down ever so slightly. So this is how it goes with these packs, is that kind of there's a process of experimenting to end up with the final result that I'm after. Okay, let me write down what I have just done with that very pale colour, which is one of black and one of lemon. Right, the final very, very pale pink that we are after. Running out of containers, so normally when I'm dyeing, by now one of these would have been put on Fibre and I'd have an empty container, but I don't anymore. So because I'm swatching them all up for you in one go. Right, that very, 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 very pale colour, I might go for a very pale version of that dye that I have just mixed up, which is using some of the black and some of the magenta, because it's just the faintest mauve colour. So we'll pull off some of this bright pink. So you can see just how incredibly, it's a proper shade of neon pink that I'm using here. It's beautiful. It works wonderfully for making these sort of quite vibrant purples and things. Creates a lovely colour dye. Right, let's go for a tiny bit of black. and a tiny bit of that pink. It's got no water left in it. So it will need diluting down. I think that might be about what we are looking for. So it's that colour there. So you can see it's just got the very, very faintest hint of colour to it. Really hardly any shade at all. But that's sort of always what I try to go for with these packs, is something that gives you lots of contrast so that you can use them to create colour work motifs and they're still going to stand out. Okay, we're going to put some dye on our fibre. So we just want ourselves a small piece of cling film. So I've squeezed, this has been in soak for 24 hours. So this is Cambrian wool, which is the Welsh Mountain Blue Face Leicester Cross that I use for all these packs. It's got lovely long staple length. It dyes beautifully. So it's Welsh wool that's sort of properly local to me. I really enjoy working with it. Right, let's go for our dark purple first. Put you to one side so I don't get confused. And then these are dyed as, they're dyed as semi-solid colours. So I dye them with a low water method because in my experience, that's the best way to get fibre dyed and have really beautiful fibre to spin. So we're just trying to get the dye evenly throughout the fibre. But I always say that I'm never trying to end up with the same as a commercially dyed semi-solid colour. It's allowed to have a little bit of variation in it because it is hand dyed. We then need our citric acid. Wasn't quite enough. Okay. Perfect. So that's going to be rolled up and then that's ready for heat setting. And we'll tuck that over there. So that's the darkest purple shade. Next up, we've got the dark green colour. So these just get laid out sort of in a zigzag fashion to expose as much of the fibre to the dye as we can. So this is our dark green colour. And they always look much darker on the fibre wet than they do once it's been heat set and then once the colours have dried. Making sure we get the end bits enough dye in them. Okay. And grab some more citric acid. But yeah, so these are called acid dyes purely because they require acidic conditions for the dye to bond onto the fibre. You can use just ordinary household vinegar, but then that smells as you're heating it up, and I don't particularly care for it. So in common with most other dyers, I use a citric acid solution which is sort of basically super concentrated lemon juice. Get those wrapped up nice and tightly. As I say, it's a low water method of dyeing. Let me move my notebook before that's gone well. Trying to move the notebook before I spilled something on it. In the process, I have just chucked pink dye everywhere. I'll clean that up in a minute. So next up, we've got our limey zesty green. So yeah, when I mostly dye from primary colours, but do have a few shades, particularly the greens and things, because one thing if you've ever done any dyeing, you sometimes notice, and you'll sometimes see this, blues and yellows have very different dye absorption temperatures. So what can end up happening is that if you try and make a green using just a mixture of blue and yellow, particularly with these low water methods, you end up with the blue absorbing onto one part of the fibre and the yellow absorbing onto another. And you kind of get this sort of splitting type effect, sort of a chroma. So if you ever did any chromatography at school, where you drew on a piece of filter paper with some with a marker pen and then dropped water at one end of it, and some of the colours split out. So I do have a few kind of green dyes in particular that help mean that you end up with a green that actually looks like green in fibre form, as opposed to some bits of blue and some bits are yellow. But yeah, I think as anybody who's doing a lot of dyeing, you start to develop your own taste for what particular dyes that you want and use. So I used to share studio space with a friend of mine, and she used to dye yarn sort of on a semi-part-time basis. So she did sort of use it as a main source of income at one point. But she wasn't dyeing sort of say more than one day a week. So she'd come over and rent studio time here rather than having it set up in her own home. So there was a few dyes that she used to like that I don't particularly enjoy using, and I'm still working my way through the last of the stocks that I had for her to use. Okay, so we've got our silvery kind of colour next. So even if it didn't look like it had a colour on the kitchen roll, hopefully you can see the colour as it's gone onto the fibre. And it is going to give us that very, very paled silvery. There's a tiny hint of green to it, which is going to go quite nicely with our colour palette. But yeah, blacks are annoying as a dyer. I don't know of anybody that has like a true black dye. They nearly always have some sort of coloured undertone. So I think there's one dye that I've used which is a black and it has a green undertone. There's some that have a very dark blue undertone. So basically, as soon as you start trying to make them into a very, very pale colour, you kind of start to see they start to look more like a pale blue or a pale purple or a pale green rather than it's like a properly silvery grey. But yeah, it's quite hard. When I did a big batch dyeing job for a guild who was celebrating their, I can't remember what anniversary it was now, and I did end up having to. They wanted a silver grey, so it might have been 25th anniversary, maybe. Anyway, but they wanted a pale grey, and because I was dyeing kilos of the stuff and it all needed to match, that was one of the times that I did cave in and pay jacquard prices for dye, because jacquard do actually have a silver grey, which is a proper shade of silver grey. But I don't dye enough pale colours to justify, well, to make space for it, basically. There's only so much room that you have for dyes. So yeah, right. That's a very pale mauvey magenta colour. But yeah, someone says, oh, that pale grey for a walk. Yeah. So this is going to be our pale mauvey type colour. And you see, this is one of the other issues about dyeing fibre in particularly pale colours like this, is that almost immediately, because we have slightly acidic water, even though this fibre isn't hot, the dye started to bond onto the fibre already. So you can actually really, really struggle to get it to be even enough. However, I think we're about there. A little bit of citric acid just to get that to bond. So that's been, this time round, that has been relatively painless compared to sometimes. Sometimes it takes me ages to decide upon the way that I want to come up with the colour and what the colour palettes are going to be. But those are all wrapped up and ready. We've got our darkest colours. There's the limey green in the middle, and then we've got our two palest colours there, which show up much better in this fibre form than they did when I was showing you the swatches on the screen. But we've got that kind of varieties of darks and lights, but it's a relatively concise colour palette this time round. Everything's a variation basically on either purple or green, and they contrast together nicely. So I think this one's going to be really, really fun to use. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you all end up coming up with. So that's ready to go in and be heat set until the dye is completely have been absorbed onto the fibre, because that's what means that they can be washed and rinsed and it doesn't cause any trouble. They should probably be ready to be going into the shop probably on Monday, which is technically public holiday, but I've got some holiday planned up for later in the month, so I'll probably be back doing certain shop stuff on Monday anyway. Which is the joys of being self-employed, is that you get to pick your own holidays, but equally, if you take the day off, nobody's paying you for that day either. So, there's no such thing as holiday pay, unfortunately. So that's ready for heat setting, and then I'm going to get on with rinsing all the fibre that I've already dyed throughout the rest of this morning. And then I've got fun things planned for the rest of this weekend, and I hope you all have similar planned. I shall see you all again roughly this time next month for whatever we shall be dyeing for June. Hope you've all enjoyed it. As ever, if you want to know more about fibre dyeing and you fancy giving it a go for yourself, I've got an entire filmed course with loads and loads of step-by-step tutorials, advice on where to get dyes, on what you're looking for in the dyes you're purchasing, advice on equipment that you might want to be using, advice on how to get lots of different techniques on fibre, and that's the link to that's in the description, and it's on if you go onto the website, it's in the online courses bit as well. So yeah, have a lovely weekend, and I shall see you all this time next month. Bye.